Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for joining us. Well, an increase in child abuse cases, but first, the big education issues, including the teacher shortage. Back in a moment.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, I'll tell you, if you have kids in school, you know that there's a teacher shortage, and that's having a big impact on education. And there are also some other issues that we want to chat about with Jeff Ney. He's the treasurer of the Pennsylvania State Education Association. All right, Jeff, you folks believe that public education is at a crossroads in our state.
Absolutely. The teacher shortage has been a decade in the making. We have been sounding the bell for this for a long time, and it's now actually coming into the limelight. And it's for several different reasons. Number one, we need to make sure that we are paying our educators, and not only just the teachers, but our support staff. We have to make sure that we are giving them a livable wage so that they are committed to the students of Pennsylvania. I'm sure you can imagine the first face a child sees in the morning is their bus driver, and probably the last face that they see. So they want to make sure that those people are there on a constant basis.
Yeah, but in addition to that, now you did come up with some pretty good funding during the Governor Corbett's years. There were cuts to education. Then with Republicans and Democrats in the legislature supported, was it $3.7 million?
$3.7 million over the past 8 years. I mean, we have had, under Governor Wolf, we have really tried our best to restore the funding cuts that were done during the Corbett years.
And it's been mostly bipartisan, too, which is, I think, a good thing. I think you would agree.
It's always great when we can have bipartisan.
All right. So over the past couple years, you've had to invest in new resources, including mental health, but also equipment. It's not like the old pen, pencil, and papers like this to write on. Education is all different. It has to be very taxing on schools to make those adjustments.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been in education now for 25 years, and it's changed dramatically just over those couple decades. One of the things that we really have taken a look at is actually our new teachers that are coming into the profession. They have some great ideas, but yet the technology needs to change with them. The pandemic has also showed us that we need to make sure that all of our schools and all of our communities have that access to those pieces that will help education succeed.
Yeah. I mean, and now there's been a change in the testing, in order to become a teacher. Is that going to have, you think, an impact on increasing the number of teachers that are available?
I'm not so sure that the testing is going to be the part that is going to get people, because we still have to get people to enter the education profession.
Correct.
So we need to make sure that we're promoting, probably all the way from high school and into college, to make sure that people understand and respect the educators that they see each and every day and want to be part of that education process.
Yeah. You used to be in the classroom, so you understand what I'm going to say about the students and learning. I mean, now we have iPhones, and even students at very young ages are having iPhones. The distractions in the classroom have to be enormous for the teacher.
I was a fifth grade math and science teacher up in the Wilkes-Barre School District for a number of years. And those distractions, and the distractions were always there. They just have gotten much more sophisticated as time goes on. So it really takes that classroom environment to make sure that you're engaging those students so that their interest is in what we're studying, not necessarily what device they have in their pockets at the time.
Yeah, and whatever homework means today, right?
Homework is one of those things where it seems to have evolved over time. Of some people really love having the homework assignments for students to practice at home. Others want to see all of that work done in the classroom. It really is an individualized for each student that shows up in our classrooms.
Yeah. All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the big issues that are, in the legislature and in the gubernatorial campaigns, and see what you think about that, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, well, I want to now ask Jeff about the campaign that's underway for governor. The candidates have positions on it. We're going to find out what he thinks about those. And when it comes to education, where do they stand?
We reached out to both campaigns. We got a reply back from Attorney General Shapiro, and he came in and he interviewed with all of our educators. A lengthy process that we go through, and he seems to be aligned with all of the ideas that we have, fully funding our schools, making sure that the supports are there, making sure that there's that livable wage for all of our support professionals. We also reached out to Senator Mastriano and his campaign, but unfortunately we have heard nothing back from him. But like I said, we try very hard to reach out to all the candidates in all of these elections.
Yeah, well, let's talk about, before we talk about their individual positions, I want to go back to something that we talked about before, and that is something that we don't think much about, and that has to do with investing in counselors and nurses and the mental health of students and all the auxiliary professionals that are absolutely essential to the functioning of schools. And that would play into the funding that each of these candidates for governor are recommending or not recommending, as the case might be.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much more to a child's education than just the classroom teacher. It is the support professionals that come in and help out with that student's education. It is the nurses. It's the counselors, especially coming out of the pandemic with the mental issues that are coming up with our students that we need to address. It's the bus drivers, it's the custodians, it's the people that are preparing the school lunches. I mean, all of these people, the secretaries that take care of all the major issues that are inside our main offices. We couldn't do our job without them.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, let's talk about the positions. Mastriano, go.
So Senator Mastriano came out with his plan of cutting over $12 billion of school funding. We're not quite sure how that works, but that would equate to about 119,000 different educational professional positions cut across the state. That would be increasing class sizes. That would be more strenuous on all of our students. And the last thing that we need right now is less supports for our students. We actually need more to make sure that they're doing it.
Yeah, and this would not only affect what goes on in the classroom, but it also would affect sports programs that are pretty, football, basketball, baseball, and a whole array of them as well.
Absolutely. So back in the Wilkes-Barre School District, I was a swim coach for over 20 years. I know that a full-rounded student education includes those kind of extracurricular activities. Cuts in education are going to greatly impact whether it's my swim program or football or cheerleading or field hockey, whatever the case may be. Sometimes it's those little programs that our students need to make sure that they are getting not just the educational component, book smarts of it, but they also need that sports outlet to make sure that they're getting everything that they need in education.
All right, let's talk to Josh Shapiro.
Josh Shapiro.
Josh Shapiro, not two of them.
Josh Shapiro, during our interview, seems to want to align himself a lot with the same ideas that we have. He wants to fully fund our schools. He wants to make sure that those students are getting all of the services for their mental health, as well as their extracurricular, as well as the stuff that's in their classroom. He wants to make sure that those students are getting everything that they possibly deserve to make sure that they're great Pennsylvanians down the road.
Yeah, and now, look, you were in the Wilkes-Barre School District. What would funding cut mean there?
Oh, a funding cut in Wilkes-Barre School District, if the Senator Mastriano's plan came through, we'd be looking at over 240 jobs lost in Wilkes-Barre School District. That would be absolutely a disaster for the Wilkes-Barre School District. I know my fellow teachers there are doing everything they can. Our class sizes would balloon to a proportion that we don't even want to think about, because we all know that our students learn best when those class sizes are a little bit smaller.
Yeah. Well, look, thanks a lot for coming in again. Mastriano, come on the program. We'd love to have you. All right, a subject that we may not want to talk about, but we have to. It's an increase in child abuse cases, and we'll get to that soon.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Joining me now is Kari King. She's the president of the Pennsylvania Partnership for Children. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we have to talk about a subject that I'm sure neither of us would like to talk about, and that is child abuse and an increase. So discuss for our viewers what's going on.
Sure. So annually we put out our State of Child Welfare report, and we've just released our 13th annual report. I should note that this data that's being captured is actually from 2021, so we're kind of a year behind.
Sure.
But we've really been curious to see. Our last report then had 2020 data, which was during the lockdown. And that data showed us that there was a pretty drastic drop in the amount of child abuse reports, between about 9,000 and 10,000 that year. You might think, oh, that's a good thing. There's less children being abused. We think it's really because children weren't being seen by mandated reporters. So those are people like teachers, pediatricians, coaches.
So it may have been going on, but not reported.
Exactly. So as we moved into 2021, and which that's the data we're looking at in this report, we were really interested in seeing, as kids went back into in-person instruction, resumed their extracurricular activities, how would that data really trend as we looked at it? And sure enough, as the kids were being seen and out and about more, we certainly had an increase in both. Pennsylvania's a little bit unique. We have two types of reports. There's called a CPS report, or Child Protective Services. That's really what you think of in terms of physical abuse, sexual abuse. But we're also a little bit unique nationally. We have what we call GPS. Those are General Protective Services. That's typically less severe. It's what you think of for neglect, housing, things like that. And that's really what we have seen skyrocketing.
So in 2021, reported over 38,000. That's enormous. And those are the reported ones.
Yes. And so that's the Child Protective Services. So those are your more severe reports of child abuse and neglect. As you noted, we saw that increase there. It's an increase of about 5,000. So I think it really does show that, kids were out and about again, and so that, those
Do you know anything about what's going on in the families that causes that?
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes into what I referenced as those General Protective Services. That's really been skyrocketing. There's been over 160,000 of those reports, and there we saw an increase of 9,000 in the past year. I think it's reflective of kind of the times we're in, between the pandemic, the economy. It's a stressful time for parents. Kids were at home more. So, for example, we see incidences of children ingesting, if there's a parental substance use disorder, children ingesting those. So I think it's kind of reflective of both the pandemic and just the stresses that families are seeing today.
Yeah. Another subject related, however, foster care increases.
Yeah, so I should note too, with our policy work, we really try to promote kinship care. And when I say kinship, that can be a grandparent, an aunt, or an uncle. But when a child has to be removed from the home, which I should note too, we really try to keep children in the home as much as possible. But if they do have to be removed, studies show that they do better when they're with someone that they know and that they trust. It can also be a family friend.
Seems to make sense.
So we really try to encourage kinship placement, but there are those times where children have to go into what we call the formal foster care system. The data that we're looking at from last year, again, pretty concerning. We're seeing that there's a pretty sharp increase in what we call re-entries. So a child's been in the system, goes back out, we try to reunify with the family, and they come back into the system.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you say here almost 1 in 4 children and youth in placement experienced a re-entry into care. Now that has to be heartbreaking.
It is, and I think it really kind of gets into one of the bigger themes that we see with the report that we're releasing, which is the stress on the system and the stress on the workforce. I think that reentry is really pointing to, why is that child not getting the services that they need? And I think it really goes back to the overall stress on the system as a whole.
Yeah, I was going to say, and that has to lead to psychological problems for kids.
Yeah. Again, the studies are there that show, involvement in the child welfare system usually equates to poorer outcomes later in life. But again, it goes back to if we can either keep the child in the home or keep the child with family, they're going to be in a better situation.
Much better. Yeah, let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the takeaways. And there's a number of agencies that are, just have a difficulty in terms of assisting in this area. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
As often in the case in a variety of fields, unless you have adequate staffing and support, it's hard to carry out the mission in foster care and to prevent child abuse, correct?
Yeah, it's something that we see, our policy areas cover really from the prenatal period, into birth through high school graduation. And we're seeing workforce issues and workforce shortages across our policy areas. Certainly in K-12 education, as has been discussed, but ranging to childcare that I think people are really noticing now. But it certainly extends into the child welfare system. I don't know that people realize necessarily how stressful of a job it is. I mean, the safety of the worker can certainly, you're going into people's homes. It can be a very tense, a very personal situation. So the emotional trauma witnessed by the workforce is pretty high. So it leads to exhaustion. So there's turnover, it's tough to recruit, and it doesn't have a lot of pay.
And it's just not children who are suffering child abuse, but you get, people from, children from a whole array of backgrounds, right? Not necessarily child abuse.
Exactly, and it really does go back to that whole delineation between the true reports of abuse versus what we see in the general protective services. And I think it reinforces the need that, this is a community issue. Not every report is, a substantiated case of child abuse. So what can we do for parents to give them supports that they need before it escalates to that point? It really is about prevention and what can be done in the community. But again, the system needs to be resourced.
Yeah.
And it's been difficult to accomplish that, certainly through the workforce and the people on the front lines.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the important reasons for placement in the first place.
Yeah.
And you say there are 5 of them.
Yeah, so there's what we are seeing this is actually the first report that we're showing the reasons for placement, and it really can vary everything from, historically it's always been parental substance use disorders. I think really what's changed there is kind of the drug of the moment that parents are using. It's been opioids, now it's fentanyl. But by and large, children are usually removed from their home because of parental substance use disorder. Right. But it can really vary from, a child's behavioral issues.
Neglect,
neglect, housing instability, which again goes back to those are those general protective services reports. So what can we do on the front end to support families? How can we support the workforce with those families before it escalates to that true child protective service report?
And for some, in some families, the parents just can't handle it.
Yeah. Parental stress is off. I think it's the inability to cope is how it's reported. And, I understand. I have a 4 and a 7-year-old. It can be stressful sometimes, and I have supports and a network there. And so for folks that don't, it's a really trying time. So I think, the system needs to think through what can we do to really support parents and families.
Yeah, another reason that you wouldn't normally think of is inadequate, what you refer to as inadequate housing. What's that mean? Houses are too small for the number of kids?
It could be as severe as true homelessness, where there's, an actual lack of housing, but it could just be too that there's, it's unstable. So the family might be moving, between relatives and things like that. So, but again, what supports can we give to the parents to make sure that that's addressed and it doesn't result in the child going into the formal system?
Yeah, and we didn't talk about it, but it's the child that also can have behavioral problems that lead to the need for a referral,
Yeah,
right?
and that really hits on an important point too. You know, I mentioned how Pennsylvania is unique in having kind of this dual reporting system. We're also unique. I think we're one of maybe 9 or 10 states that has a county administered child welfare system. So that means we have 67 different versions of, and you know, the administration of child welfare in our state. Most states in the country have a state administered system. Our Department of Human Services has licensure oversight of the county agencies, but really, you know, I think it's popular in our state to compare, you know, Philadelphia to a county like Elk or Forest, but you see a wide variance too from a Lancaster to a Lehigh, or, you know, if you've seen one county, you've seen one county. And so I think it puts a lot of burden on counties to really be able to provide the services for that child. If they are behavioral, there's connections out there they can make referrals to. But again, it goes back to how resourced are those counties, and oftentimes the answer is not very well.
Yeah, that leads me to an important question about assistance that you can get from Congress, the state legislature, and other. Are there companies, you know, in the private sector that invest in this as well?
Yeah, it dovetails very nicely with home visiting services, which is an area of our policy work. If folks are familiar with programs like Early Head Start, that's usually a pretty well-known one. There's family partnerships. Currently, there's 8 in Pennsylvania that are providing these. It's true kind of parenting skills. It's these prevention programs that I've been talking about to try and negate the need for a child to go into the foster care system. There's actually, the program needs to be reauthorized in Congress imminently. Just recently, the House Ways and Means Committee did move a bill. We have 4 members, so Representative Evans, Boyle, Smucker, and Kelly are all on the committee. They all have a co-sponsor for the legislation, so it shows bipartisan support. I think policymakers understand the value of these services. That it shows parents the skills that they need. Again, to, you know, if you invest early, you're not going to invest later.
Right.
We're really hopeful that there will be continued momentum for the reauthorization, but it could very well lapse, which is unfortunate. It'll provide a lot of instability, I think, for, again, the workforce, for the families.
What about foster care models? I mean, you have to have children who go through this or models of success as a result of being in foster care.
Yeah, you know, certainly for those children that do have to go into the foster care system, they can't be placed with kin. There's been a lot of emphasis around foster family recruitment. And again, what supports can they be given? It's a stressful situation that they're dealing with, especially, you know, foster placement is often older youth, or what we call transition age youth. So that's children ages 14 or older. So you're getting into a lot of those behavioral problems. So what are those types of supports that can be provided so that a child is at least stable with their foster care placement and not, as we said, that re-entry or kind of bouncing from one home to another, which is just going to lead to worse outcomes in their adulthood.
Yeah, and they can be used to show that the system does work, correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there's, I think it really is a matter of stability and consistency for children.
All right, thanks. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and always, as always, you stay well.